and one is hopefully going to be popping on shortly as well. But before we delve into that main topic of the day, which is water and energy, how to fix the squeeze, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to give their opinion on the list of stories which is showing on your screen at the moment. First up is Edoardo Borgomeo. He is the water specialist at the World Bank. Edoardo, please let me know if I got your pronunciation of your surname correct. And welcome, and please tell us which story jumps out at you.
Thanks, Michelle, and I'm glad to be here today with all of you. The story that jumps out to me is the one on public utilities needing billions in upgrades. And that's interesting to me because I think those upgrades are going to be different from the typical upgrades that we do to our water and energy infrastructure. Because of climate change, we need to rethink the way in which we plan our investments, not just to be least cost, but also robust and resilient to unforeseen climate circumstances.
You said that the way they need to be changed is different. Do you think that there's awareness of that?
I think in some circles we begin to see this awareness, but the awareness, Michelle, I think is going to come as we see some of the impacts of climate change. Think of the recent disruptions in Texas. The more events such as those we see, the more people are going to become aware of the need to change the way in which we plan our infrastructure and the services that they deliver.
And perhaps the better the regulatory and the incentive framework for investors to be able to support those will start coming from government and wider industry as well. Next up is Professor Peng Wang. Thank you very much for joining us. He is a professor at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. Professor Wang, which story grabs your eye today?
I would choose the achieving water energy security, the number 3.
Very apt.
Yeah, so the reason I choose this one is that everybody needs fresh water, and everybody need energy to have a decent life. At this point, the water energy nexus is not in a very good shape. If we continue our current path, we are pushing our Earth to a path with no return. So that's why I'm very interested in doing research on this topic. I'm very interested in promoting a sustainability and the water energy nexus to a broad audience. So thanks for having me, so I can have a chance to reach out to all of your audience today.
Well, thank you very much.
Michelle. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Shahzad is in, by the way.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Irene. Hello, Dr. Mohammed Shahzad. You're a research scientist at Northumbria University. Thank you very much for joining us. We've just been going through the top 10 stories of the day. If we could put those back up on the screen so you can see them.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. No, not at all. Thank you very much for joining us. Would you like to choose a story from that top 10 and see which one is flashing at you in neon lights, which really makes a change for you?
Yeah, so actually I would like to talk about CPV thermal water production system. And the reason is that normally we cover only at the one side story, either it is PV or solar thermal, but these two can be combined and it can, the synergetic effect, it can improve the overall performance. So in this CPV thermal, it will not only help to improve the PV performance, but we can get the additional thermal effect to produce the water. So it can be a best match to produce electricity as well as water.
Excellent. I'm glad you mentioned that because I have a few questions for the team today on technology, so we can certainly loop back to that. Obviously, this is Gulf Intelligence, so I just like to lead with a MENA question, if that's all right, and it'll be coming your way, Peng. So the World Bank estimates that climate-related water scarcity will cost the MENA region up to 14% of its GDP by 2050. This is a very high figure, especially considering that by 2050, the regional population will be far higher, of course, especially in nations like Egypt, one of the fastest growing populations up to 2100. And the broader climate impacts will also have been intensified in the region as one of the world's most susceptible to the worst impacts of climate change and the risk of refugees as well. So this is a very strained backdrop by 2050, potentially anyway. So against that picture, Peng, what do you think needs to be done this year to accelerate, like you say, it's not in good shape, to accelerate progress to balancing out that water energy nexus and stay away as far as possible from that 14% figure?
Well, the answer for me is always very simple. We have to reduce our carbon dioxide emission as much as possible, as fast as possible. There are many ways for us to do that. Renewable energy, especially solar energy, is really my favorite. So I'm a big believer in solar energy, in solar energy's capability to help us to solve the global warming. Now today, since we are talking about water energy nexus, so long as we also work on our water issue in a similar manner, we can confidently achieve both water energy security in due course.
How do we do that? So Edoardo, what do you think, for this year, the steps that can be made to get us as close as possible to the place that we need to be? Peng's already mentioned that it's not in the best state that it could be. So Edoardo, what do you think the steps that could be done in the next several months of this year that could get us closer to that water energy security and water security as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Michelle. And some of the data that you cite come from a World Bank report we put out a few years back. And some of the insights from that report are still valid today, I think. And really what we suggested there were three things that countries could start doing immediately and in sequence. The first one is focusing on demand for resources. And if we think of water, it really comes down to reducing this demand in cities. It amounts to, plugging the leaks and educating people to use less water. In agriculture means avoiding water-thirsty crops in arid areas, for example. Then the second step is realigning demand, meaning that in some countries, we might have to make difficult decisions and move water from sectors where water is not used very productively towards sectors where it can be used more productively. These are tough choices, which require also some political commitment. And then finally, what we suggested in that report is the increasing supply. This is where technology and non-conventional water supply, such as creating water with desalination or wastewater recycling, that's when they come in. We have these three steps, and all of them kind of sits on top of governance. So regulation, which I think we mentioned at the beginning, and also something which is not often discussed, and then I'll close, what we call water accounting, measuring how much water is available in the system and how much water different users are consuming. Paradoxically, we always talk about water efficiency, water scarcity, but in most countries, we don't have these water accounts. We don't know how much is coming in and how much is coming out. Think about, trying to tax people without knowing what your budget is like.
Indeed. Just before we go into the first question, survey question, on that point of measuring and verifying and the accountability that comes from that as well, are you seeing any countries that are making particular progress with that could perhaps be a template for others, not just in MENA, but globally?
Again, great question. So I think water accounting and using that to then feed into water policy, some good experiences come, for instance, from Singapore, which has integrated technology with this stronger water governance that rests on data. And then there are also examples in the Middle East and North Africa, but those are not national scale pilots. Those are more smaller scale pilots in irrigated areas, for example, with experiences from Egypt and Morocco, which we can discuss later if you want.
Yes, please do. So let's have that first survey question up. So links in very nice to what you were just mentioning, Edoardo. And it's very simple. Energy companies are proactively trying to protect water use and mitigate their water waste. So this is not a leading question. It is really asking whether you think that's true or not. I know that the majority answer on that, very simple, yes or no. And we'll come back to that in a minute or so, once everyone's had a chance to vote. Mohammed, what are your thoughts on that question?
So I think that this is very important, so that the energy companies and the water companies, actually these two cannot be separate from each other. These two are very interlinked. Also, as per the United Nations Sustainability Goals, so SDG 6 and 7, water and energy, those are very interlinked with each other. So improving one will automatically improve the other sector. So the energy company or the water company, they have to work together, not only to improve the efficiency, but also to reduce the losses. And as my colleague, he mentioned that the improving the performance like Singapore and other countries, I think we have to improve in the agriculture that consume more than 70% of the water. So like Singapore, the vertical farming or the drip irrigation, they can save the water over 70% and improve the crop production to over 40% by this, the innovative agriculture solution. So I think the water and the energy, they will go hand by hand, and the both sectors have to improve.
And why are such solutions not more widespread? Because vertical farming is not a new idea at all. So it's fantastic they're making such progress, but why such ideas and the utilization, why is it not more common? Is it due to investment? Is it due to the technology needs, climate, geography? What is it?
So I think the major factor is a confidence on the technology. So even though they're the small scale implementation, but to come out from the comfortable zone, it's very important to implement on the large scale to demonstrate. So in that way, the policymakers and the government, they have to come into play a role and bring these technologies into the real field to demonstrate to the investors and to the companies. So once we have the small demonstration, it's very difficult to provide the confidence to the investors and the companies to bring these technologies to the real field.
Do you think there's a psychological element of social confidence as well in people understanding or feeling comfortable with a whole new food system potentially emerging?
So I think it's not only the people, it's the companies and the investors that actually...
No, that's what I said as well. So do you think as well there's also a psychological element from people, from the public?
Yes, of course. Of course, there's a psychological impact also, and the factor also that also affect this kind of the technology to bring into the real market.
All right, let's see that survey answer. Let's see where the land lies. Yes. So they are trying to do enough to, well, they are trying to protect their water use and mitigate water waste. That's a very positive answer. We're going to bring the second question up now, please. And while you're answering that, I'm going to come over to you, Dr. Peng, with a technology question, as I was touched upon earlier. So water shortages are more of a threat to energy companies' profit margins and market security than they realize. Is this a ticking, quiet in the corner time bomb that a lot of energy companies have on their agendas? They do speak about it. It's part of their sustainability reports. It's part of their future risk awareness. But the real risk, the fundamental risk of how it threads into their operations and into energy security, as well as, of course, bottom line success, hasn't quite settled in yet. So please have a look at that question and see what your thoughts are. So Professor Peng, we know that energy demand is fast rising, and that's putting pressure on the water system. Again, that's something we've touched on. And a 2018 study published by MDPI states that desalinating 1,000 cubic meters of water a day consumes roughly 10,000 tons of oil per year. So of course, in this decarbonizing narrative that the global push has started on, the resulting greenhouse gas emissions from that equation just simply no longer work. What are your thoughts in terms of using technologies? You mentioned solar earlier, using technologies and what can be done this year to start changing the face of that balance and improving technology use in desalination?
Yes, so I just want to repeat what I said in the very beginning. Solar energy holds a lot of potential for us to solve our global sustainability issue. Now at this point, we have mature technologies available for us to push our world towards energy and water sustainability. Now we just need to have the available technology to be powered by solar or other type of renewable energy. And I agree with what Muhammad said. That there's confidence issue. There are also some other issues that are in the way of us adopting some mature technologies that have potential to get us to our final point. Like in some low-income country, we have issues of institutional mechanism, financial mechanism not available for mature technology to be adopted to to have the water being produced with minimum carbon footprint. So it's a big picture that we have to take a look at every part of the story carefully before reaching to a conclusion. And again, so for the excuse me, for the solar energy, Middle East is leading the world in PV electricity production. Now, last year in 2020, from what I read, the UAE will produce PV electricity at the lowest price in the world, 1.35, I guess, US cents per kilowatt hour. So as long as we are getting more electricity from renewable energy source, and we are moving into the right direction.
Excellent, thank you. Edoardo, what do you think in terms of technologies when it comes to water use and improving water security? What should we be paying attention and watching? Of course, solar is one as Peng's already detailed, but what else is there that we should be keeping an eye out on?
So I'm not a technologist myself, but I would say the technologies that I keep an eye on are the ones on for water treatment using membranes, and those can be very helpful in expanding the reuse of wastewater. So we do the circular economy of water, if you like. We recycle water, no longer discharge it, but keep it flowing into our cities, our agricultural systems, and then. On technology, I also have a word of caution, if you like, when it comes to technologies that help us create water, such as desalination. Those are great, and we will need them in the future. But we also need to be careful because they create supply, and we know that in economics, supply also creates its own demand. The more water we give to people, the more water they're going to use. Therefore, just relying on water technology to solve our global water crisis is a misplaced view. So we need technology together, as we were saying earlier, better regulation and measurement.
Indeed, it's those three pillars that you detailed at the beginning, and the holistic picture and them all working together. Can we bring up that second survey question so we can see the answer, please? Water shortages are more of a threat to market security than energy companies realize. 88%. Mohammed, does that answer surprise you?
It's quite okay. I agree that the water shortage is a more threat to the companies as well, because so actually even the power production companies like the traditional power, they also need the water. So implementation of renewable energy sources, Professor Peng mentioned, the PV, the GCC or the MENA region, they are leading. So actually they are not only supplying this renewable energy for the water production, also they are reducing the water consumption in the power sector. So these are actually interlinked between each other. So implementation of PV or other kind of the renewable resources will not only bring the green water production, but also reduce the water consumption in the power sector.
And what about you, Edoardo, on a global basis, not just the MENA region, on a global basis, do you think that this is a ticking time bomb in the background, that energy companies don't know the depth of the threat?
Yes, definitely. I think what we call it water risk, and I think this is increasingly an issue for energy companies. And I think this is a material risk in terms of the physical risks, for example, of the river that you use for cooling your thermal power plant running dry. That's a physical risk. But more importantly, and I think energy companies might be overlooking this, is the reputational risk linked with messing a shared resource such as water, which is also a human right. It's a very delicate resource. And therefore, risk thinking in relation to water in energy needs to look at the physical dimension, as well as these more social and reputational aspects.
Do you see that happening more and more as part of this broader decarbonization conversation that's finally kicked off in the last 2 years on a global basis? Or do you think it's being drowned out a little bit?
No, I see it happening, but I also think that companies are not being very accurate sometimes in the way in which they report these risks. We can give the example of BlackRock, which is not an energy company, but as you know, they were pushing towards decarbonization and the ESG reporting, but at the same time, they were caught in a scandal with the oil palm investments in Asia. So I think there is much more attention needs to be paid to the accounting and reporting of water risks from energy company in the same way in which they report, financials and things of that nature.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's almost the concept of inventing the wheel. It seems so obvious that there needs to be accounting and verification. It just seems such an obvious step. It's a key part of all energy markets, and we're seeing that be a major factor in a lot of the low carbon markets for energy that are growing as well. To not have it with water, like you say, such a precious resource that affects all of us to our very survival, seems bonkers, to use a British phrase. Mohammed, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think, are you seeing any level of or growing amount of accountability that you think is reassuring, or do you also feel that's a real risk, a real concern?
I think this is a real concern because I still feel that it's not handled properly, and this risk is growing, and the government have to focus, or the companies have to focus on to handle this risk properly in the near future here.
I mean, Edoardo, what is it going to take? Because it was only recently that Cape Town and other areas as well, but Cape Town most worryingly did run out of water. A whole city.
Day zero events, yes, exactly. Yeah.
It never arrived.
What does it take to have this real step change with water security, Edoardo? It doesn't feel like it's as sharp or as dramatic as we're seeing in the low carbon energy markets, such as with solar and hydrogen, for example.
Yeah, I think so. In the case of Cape Town, is a great reminder of the fact that crises are very helpful as policy windows to come in and implement some policy. So in the case of Cape Town, the event really made people realize how precious water was and how scarce and how mismanaged the resource. The water mismanagement was widespread in South Africa. Perhaps to solve the water security crisis, an interesting thing to consider is that I guess two dimensions. The first one is the economics one. Water is underpriced in most parts of the world. I'm not suggesting that we need to get the price of water right, but we need to start thinking more about valuing water, thinking about placing quantity restrictions on water use so that then people have to optimize within a set limit their water consumption. And then another thing which is very important, Michelle, and then I'll conclude, is the fact that policy levers outside of water are very important when we're trying to address water scarcity. And the example here is it might make more economic sense rather than building 10 desalination plants. It might be better to reduce water consumption in agriculture and have a food trade policy which does not aim at food self-sufficiency only, but tries to balance internal food production with food trade. And if you do that, you obviously reduce your overall agricultural water consumption, and you're therefore better able to live with the limited land and water resources that you have.
And of course, the downside to that is that, just before we bring up the last survey question, the downside to that is that it requires so many pieces of the puzzle to become aligned at the same time. And how long will that take? Do you have hope that in this decade, Mohammed, that we will see significant changes in the way that we in our households, industries, businesses manage our water? As Edoardo is talking about, those three pillars are so critical, and the way we actually, the level of demand as well needs to be dramatically addressed. Do you have hope that in this decade that can be done?
So actually, I totally agree that it's not only putting the more desalination plant and producing the more water. It's awareness is also very important, because now the water consumption and the wastage is more. And if we provide the proper awareness and put the proper cost and the policies, then I think that will also be a more helpful as compared to if we just install the desalination plants. So in near future, in let's say in a 5 or 10 year plan, I think together with producing the more water, the implementation of the proper policies and the pricing is also very important to restrict the people to utilize the water more wisely.
And there's that economic point as well that Edoardo mentioned. CDP said that in 2020, companies reported financial impact of water risk max at $301 billion US, which is 5 times more than the cost of addressing them. that economic argument is going to get stronger as the population grows, as the energy demand rises as well, and the threat starts to intensify. If we could bring up our last survey question, please, and then Professor Wang, I'm going to come over to you, because obviously it's to do with your region more specifically. The Arab Gulf will have a regional network of desalination plants and freshwater reservoirs by 2030. Agree or disagree? The reason we're asking this is pan-regional energy setups, most notably gas and power, have not quite taken off in the region as planned or as many have hoped. And of course, the region is at the greatest risk when it comes to water scarcity in terms of the size of population that would be affected, the level of climate refugees that could be caused by water shortages intensifying going forward. And of course, there are already very severe water shortages in some parts of MENA. Now, there's questions about the Arab Gulf, but the idea being that increasing the level of security via desalination of freshwater reservoirs, as well as the other points we discussed in terms of policy, the economic triggers and addressing demand as well. The idea being that if that region can be more stable, perhaps there's greater support it can offer to the wider MENA region. So while everyone's answering that question, Professor Wang, can you give me your thoughts on that, please? Do you think that's likely in the next 9 years?
Well, first, I think having a regional network of desalination plant in the Middle East region is a good idea, because at this point, the region represents about 50% of the global seawater desalination capacity. Now, I'm not quite sure about the freshwater reservoir. How effective can that be? And what's the rationale behind having this freshwater reservoir? But I feel that using Singapore as a good example for wastewater reuse, the Middle East has not done a very good job in wastewater recycling. Now, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential in getting wastewater back to a natural reservoir, and then use that water coming off natural reservoir to provide drinking water. So if the freshwater reservoir is for this purpose of restoring treated wastewater, I believe this is a very good idea.
Okay, brilliant. Let's see those results, please. Let's see them come through. All right. Not a little less stark than our previous two results, but still pretty much divided. Just before we wrap up, Mohammed, I'd love your thoughts on that. Do you agree?
Yes, I totally agree. And I think we learned the lesson from this COVID pandemic as well. So sometime in some part of the region, they may need the more water as compared to the other parts. So I think the transboundary interlinking will help to solve this kind of issues in future.
And Edoardo, what do you think? Final notes of the podcast.
Yeah, no, I really hope that there is a regional water grid soon in the Arab region, though I think that's challenging, not least because water is a strategic resource, and so sometimes countries tend to want to securitize the resource, unfortunately. But I do hope that we will have a water grid soon.
Excellent. Edoardo, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mohammed, as well. And Peng, for your time. We really appreciate it. I think we've managed to cover quite a few parts, and we'll certainly be revisiting this. There is a huge amount to say, and I feel we've only very much gone to the tip of the iceberg. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.